When I was I think I was about 18 or 19 years old, I went off to Washington, D.C., and I lived and worked on Capitol Hill. I got to work with a lot of senators, a lot of congressmen. I got to spend some time in the White House. But one of the most important things that happened when I was there is I started living with a group of people. They're called the Fellowship, and they're Christians, and they're men and women who live and work in Washington, D.C. They're committed to expanding what we call the kingdom, God's kingdom, and they would look for what they called wiggle room. And wiggle room would be those places in the job, in school, in relationship environments where you can extend the kingdom of God, the ways of God. You can move them into an environment that might not normally be a place where God would dwell. One of the things that happened when I was living there is we were studying what does the Bible say about countries relating to one another. It's called foreign policy. And at that time, there was a revolution going on in Nigeria. And in Nigeria, there was a Christian man, his name was Larry, and he was a follower of Jesus. And he was actually next in line to be the vice president of Nigeria. And he was very passionate about these ideas of how to take God's ways and extend them into his world as a political leader, how you work with other countries. And he was really outspoken. And there began to be threats for his life. He was a follower of Jesus. And during that time, when it became very serious and we were concerned that he was going to be murdered, this group of men and women that I was living with and studying with, they determined that they were going to take him and smuggle him out of Nigeria and bring him to the United States. That all worked out, and he became my teacher. And so we would study, for sometimes his classes would go 2 or 3 hours, but he was one of those teachers that was so passionate, and you could just see God flowing through his life and the Spirit of God flowing through him. And he would teach our classes, and then what would happen is he'd invite us to come home in the evenings with him. His wife would prepare a meal, a Nigerian meal, so we get to have Nigerian food and get to sit at this guy's feet and just listen to his stories and his testimonies. I learned so much from him, and it was at that time that I shifted and began volunteering as a teacher in inner city Washington, D.C., right in downtown D.C., and I fell in love with teaching. I came home from Washington, D.C., came back to Phoenix, Arizona, changed my major around, and decided that I wanted to be a teacher. Before that all happened, though, when I'd come home, I had an opportunity to go back, and I studied in England for a while. And while I was in England, some of the members of the fellowship, I got to have an encounter with them, and I said, "Tell me about Larry. What happened to Larry?" And they said, "Jeff, we'd like you to sit down." And they began to tell me his story. Larry's wife had become very homesick and wanted to go home to her homeland. And she snuck out middle of the night one night, found a way to get on an airplane and went back to Nigeria. Several days later, when Larry found out what had happened, he went after her and went to find her. What I'm told is when Larry arrived in Nigeria and he stepped on out of the airplane, he was martyred and he was murdered. And so one of the things that drives my day, my everyday, is I want to be more like Larry. I can tell you personally that I know a martyr, someone that took his commitment to the Lord and his faith so seriously and so passionately that it wasn't a secret to anybody. He didn't brag about it, he just lived it. And for me, he was a reflection. As though Jesus were living his life, this is what it would look like. And Larry showed me that. And so as an educator, every day when I walk among the students that I serve, every day is an opportunity for me to reflect Larry. One of the things that I believe in for me as a Christian is that I believe in what's called a living curriculum. That there might be people around me who's never read Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, but they're going to watch the way I live my life. And I know for younger generations, what they're really pursuing is they don't want to hear another sermon. They don't want to hear another message. What they're looking for are people, they just live it. They don't brag about it, it just comes out of them. And that's the beautiful thing about the Spirit of God. The same Spirit that poured out at Pentecost is the same Spirit that's alive and well in us today. It's alive in Larry. Larry is more alive now than he's ever been. And we get to be a part of that journey. And that the Spirit of God still lives within you. I want to encourage you. You can be that to somebody else and inspire them. It happened to me. God puts those kind of people in our lives every day.